Let me tell you another thing about our boss. He's the bestest. And welcome to College Football Now, our weekly webcast devoted to college football. I'm Brant Parsons. Beside me, as always, our national college football writer, Matt Murschel. And lots to talk about today. We'll touch upon Steve Spurrier resigning, retiring, quitting, whatever you want to call it. Steve Sarkisian out at USC. Obviously, some big games this week also. Will I still be drinking the Gatorade? We'll find out at the end. But opening it up, and I start planning this show days and like Saturday. So I had an outline on Sunday for the show. I threw it away, completely scrapped it. Monday, a crazy day in college football news, at least in our sports department and things we follow. And we're going to start with the biggest news story out there, in our opinion, and that, of course, is the Will Grier suspension that came out on Monday afternoon, a PED suspension by the NCAA. Different than a drug suspension with a school, which each school determines, if you're caught with a street narcotic. This is an NCAA violation. It is a year suspension, a calendar year suspension for Will Grier. He's already spoke on it. He's talked about how sorry he was in a press conference. They've addressed it. The Gators will move forward with this with Trayon Harris as the quarterback. But let's just talk about the news. Will Grier had helped the resurgence of Florida this year. They are undefeated, 6-0, bowl eligible already through 6 weeks of the season. Shocking news to anybody that follows the program or even the sport.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. You think about what Florida's been able to do this year, great start, looking at going into this, probably the biggest game of the year for them, really, when you think about it, against LSU, on the road at Tiger Stadium. You come off of that win against Missouri on Saturday. Here you're thinking, let's just start focusing on LSU and Leonard Fournette, and instead you spend the first part of your week dealing with this situation. Listen, I want to be clear about this. Will Grier, and he owned up to it because this is a mistake, but this is something that every athlete, every football player is given a list at the beginning of the year before they even start doing anything, and it says you're not allowed to take these things. And they also have trainers who come in and say, listen, don't put anything in your body without consulting us first, because they want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. So this is something that it doesn't happen all the time, but they do tell you can't take these kind of materials. Whether, Will Grier said it was an over-the-counter supplement, whatever it is, you can't put this kind of stuff. I don't care if it's Flintstone vitamins. You can't take these without having someone look at it because, again, these things will set off the test. And how the NCAA does this is it's done randomly. They go out and they test. And what they'll do is they'll take 2 samples. And if you fail the first sample, they go back and retest the second sample to make sure. That apparently is what happened this weekend with Will Grier and moving forward. So it is a 1-year suspension. I know fans were up in arms saying, listen, that we're going to appeal. It should only be half a year. Why should it have to go back all the way into next season? But NCAA is very clear about this. Their policy has been there for a while. They are pushing to test for the PEDs. They're going to make sure this does not become an issue in their sport. So I don't think they'll win the appeal. I think Will Grier will have to sit out for the full year.
And that was the reaction that I saw, and I was trying to talk Florida fans down from a ledge just because we'll get into the football aspect of it. I think that the football team still can do well this season, but this is not the same thing as a quarterback. The other quarterback, the team, Trayon Harris was suspended. The other player suspended. Any conduct issues that teams, that's kind of the general term that they use for a suspension. This is an NCAA suspension. This is a clear-cut NCAA suspension. It is written out. There's no leeway on it. It's very simple. If you fail a drug test, you are out a calendar year. That is how the NCAA does it. There's no 6 to 12 months as determined. It is 1 year. That's what he was given. It was an NCAA test. It's not a school decision.
Yeah.
and so he will be out for a calendar year. And I don't think he wins the suspension. And I thought what you touched upon it too. And you want to feel bad for the kid. I mean, for any time, I mean, you want to feel bad in this situation, but you also realize. And I was a walk-on athlete in college, and this was 20-some years ago. I'm going to date myself, but even as a walk-on track team where we had a coach and that was it, we were still told, do not take anything that you shouldn't take. Everything goes through them. You get a list of things you can do. You know you're going to be drug tested. You can come in one day and be drug tested for it. At the University of Florida, when you play football, you have a strength coach, a nutritionist, and I have an entire staff that deals with this stuff. It's a mistake, but I don't know if it's a completely innocent mistake, because when you go to a program as big as Florida, you are told repeatedly, I don't care if it's over the counter. It doesn't mean that you can take this into NCAA. He failed to do that. He failed to go through the proper channels for it, and now he's going to pay the price for it.
Yeah, and I commend him really for coming out forward, and I commend Florida for putting him out forward, making him the face. I mean, listen, we've seen schools in the past, ones in this state, where if an athlete gets in trouble, they don't put them out face forward to kind of deal with the situation when it comes to addressing the media. We saw that with Will Grier. He stood up and spoke, very emotional. Obviously, this is something that he regrets doing, and it impacts the team, it impacts his career. But moving forward, Florida isn't in a doom and gloom situation. We have to make that clear too. I mean, this isn't a case where all of a sudden this team is going to lose the remainder of their games probably. I mean, Treon Harris comes into this situation. He started 7 games in his career. He's 5-2 as a starter, so he's very familiar with that role. He just hasn't played a big role early on in this offense. But I would say this too. If something like this is going to happen, you'd rather have it happen on a Monday rather than a Thursday, because at least with happening on a Monday morning, Treon Harris now takes the first team snaps the whole week. He'll be prepared and more comfortable going into this weekend's game against LSU.
And it also helps to have a guy like Harris who's played before. This is not going to be his first start. It's not going to be his first game action. And as we talk about Florida going forward, and the reaction by Florida fans was almost like this was like a tragedy that was going to ruin their entire season. And I don't believe that, because the defense is what has been driving his team. And Will Grier has been making plays, but Treon Harris, you can't compare last year Treon Harris to this year, because, I mean, let's be honest, last year's offense, they were making plays with finger paints and crayons. I mean, the offense is so much better this year. They've been able to find options in Brandon Powell and others to be able to utilize the offense. If he can get in there and not make mistakes and play well, I don't think the drop-off is going to be as big as Gator people expect. Will Grier does not play defense. This defense is very good. It's a tough loss, but I think going forward, and that's why I have it here, is what it means for Florida going forward is I don't think that the season's over because of this, because there's still a lot of talent there.
Yeah, there is, and I also look at the fact that what you're going to see happen on offense especially is they're going to tweak the offense a little bit. They're going to do that with Treon Harris. He brings a different skill set as a quarterback than Will Grier brings. I think Harris is more of a definitely a dual threat, can run with better legs maybe than Will Grier at times. I think he's got a little more touch on his passes. Maybe not as strong as an arm as Will Grier, but he's definitely going to be there. So I think when we've already heard Jim McElwain say, they're going to change some things up. They'll run some different play sets in there to see what happens. I think in some regards this is a good thing, because I think as LSU was preparing to face Will Grier, now they got to switch gears and worry about facing Treon Harris, who could do some different things. And listen, Harris, again, as we move forward, they're going to have a bye week, and then they're going to play that big Georgia game. And I think that's a game where Harris really kind of got his feet wet last year. So he'll have opportunities. He knows what's going to happen. You play at Florida, these things, things come up and we'll be there. As you mentioned, the defense is going to be the issue, but I think we'll get on that later on.
Yeah, we'll get into the Florida LSU game and previewing and stuff. But Jim McElwain, I think he said it best in his part of the press conference where he said, and Will Grier said the same thing, it's the way it goes here, next man up.
Yeah.
And the team has already moved on to that point, so now the fans need to move on.
Yeah, it is. But
back in off the ledge, guys.
Again, the last time we were talking about this off camera. We're trying to remember a time when a star player at a ring-ranked team was suspended for a PED drug test. So I don't think we can remember anything recently. So it's been a while.
I mean, it's an NCAA push on it, and obviously that's what happened to us. And we thought that the other news we're going to talk about in the state was the big news Monday, and that was Monday morning when UCF coach George O'Leary, as we kind of thought was coming up over the weekend, stepped down as the interim AD at UCF, a dual role he had taken over this summer. Some concerns, I think, both with fans and and administration and maybe even within the team that it was too much for him, and the football team starting off 0-6 and looking, as bad as they have. I mean, they lost to UConn on Saturday, 40-13. But now this is George O'Leary's now out of the AD role. They are now going to bring in a new AD. So now he's back. He's the football coach, but we don't even know how long he's going to still be the football coach. What does more about the football and the college football? What does the O'Leary news kind of say toward the football aspect of this?
Well, see, this is a move. I think this was a move that should have been done beforehand. I don't think it should have been done. I think O'Leary shouldn't have been athletic director, to be honest with you. I know it's worked at some schools, but you found a prolonged sense of success at some of those schools. We talk about Nebraska. You talk about Wisconsin with Barry Alvarez. I just don't think that he fit that role very well. Now, I'm not basing those on decisions he made as athletic director. But I'm looking at this football program in general. I mean, you look at what they've done. Yes, they were coming off another conference championship, but I think you have to look at the fact is where do you see the program moving ahead? There have been a lot of question marks surrounding George O'Leary. Was this going to be his last year? Was last year going to be his last year? What is his future hold? And I think he's tried to answer that as much as he can, but I think the more every week as the team goes through the struggles they're going through and they continue to be winless, I think more and more people are wondering, is this guy going to be around at the end of the year? And as we've seen, as we'll talk about later on, at other program with Steve Spurrier in South Carolina, those questions will really start to haunt you, especially on the recruiting trail. And that's where I think it's very key, because if kids aren't really interested in coming to your program because they're not sure if you're going to be there or who's going to be, the coaching staff going to be there, or what's going to happen, I think that's where you really start to wonder if it's time maybe to make a change. And I think also, too, when you look at what O'Leary taking over this team, I don't think it was like he was spending way too much time there. I mean, there's injuries, there's issues on the offensive side of the football, there's injuries on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think all of that can fall on O'Leary's shoulders. But I think definitely now, him having that focus back, it's now up to him. If they continue to struggle this year, I think at the end of the year, you're going to see a lot of people wondering if he's going to be around.
But they're 5-1, 6-0. Do you think people care that he's the interim AD? I mean, people, not maybe people to know, because all signs point to there's a management style that O'Leary has that may not work in an interim AD role. But do you think the backlash for him to do this right now in the middle of the season comes up if the football team's 5-1, 6-0, playing well in the conference?
No, I don't think so. But the reason I think they should have gone with an athletic director, and hired someone outside the program was because I think always you got to think long term. You don't want to just think about what's going to happen this year or next year or the next 17 months or whatever. You want to think long term, and I think what you need is an athletic director who comes in with a lot of vision, who comes in and can take maybe a guy who's either familiar with the program or isn't. A guy who can really kind of take a good hard look at the program and decide what do we need to do to continue to move forward. I think just kind of being the status quo and accepting the fact that you've won a Fiesta Bowl and that you're in the American Athletic Conference and you've gone to big bowl games. I think you need to keep looking bigger and bigger and bigger. Listen, too, if George O'Leary was, and no offense, if George O'Leary was 20 years younger, I mean, again, maybe then you could say, okay, this guy's going to be here for the next, he could be here for 30 more years. But I know it's hard to look at age. People do look at that, and they think, well, how much longer are you going to be there? This all really does come down to recruiting, I think, in some regards, because if you're losing those top recruits and you're not getting kids to come to the school, and as we saw on Saturday, attendance looked horrible. If you can't keep people to come to games, that's when the red flags came up, and I think that's why they made the move they did. And
we're looking at this team now, 0-6. The winnable games are behind them. Mm-hmm. FIU, Furman, Tulane, UConn. The next stretch does not look promising for them, maybe all the way until the end against USF when they could be playing for a win. So the new AD, his first job is going to be to look at this football team. Is this a winless football team this year? Can you see them figuring out a way to win? Because I keep thinking, well, they might be able to match up well against Tulane and they get embarrassed. UConn came in with a horrific offense. They score 40 points. I'm starting to wonder, maybe there isn't a win in this UCF team this year.
No, I don't think there is. I thought maybe they had a good chance against UConn. I felt like they came out, obviously Justin Holman looked better, looked sharper. You could see why the offense looked under him. But then again, they struggled. They couldn't score points. I think there's so many injuries. There's so many young players out there right now that aren't being able to. And what happens, too, is, and you don't hear this so much, is that when you lose, I think the players start to feel like, everyone is against them. They're reading about it in the papers. They're watching it on our show.
Yes.
They're hearing about it everywhere else. And when that starts to happen, then you kind of, it's tough to get out of that mode. And I think, that's where, again, maybe that's a little bit why they wanted George back focused 100% of the team, making sure that you don't lose those players, making sure the coaching staff doesn't lose that players. And it's not just the kids, it's the staff too as well, because then you got coaches trying to figure out what are we doing wrong, what do we need to do, how do we get some of these younger players to be more athletic. And some of it goes back to, do we recruit the right kids? Because at some spots, maybe. I don't see a definite playmaker on this team right now. I think Holman's probably the closest thing right now. But other than that, you look around. Do you see anyone there right now that you can point to and say, that kid scares me enough that if I'm an opposing coach, I'm going to defend against him if I find a way to stop him? I don't think so. So I think, again, we go back to recruiting. It's about making sure you kind of work towards the future, because this year really looks like it's going to be a rebuilding year.
And really, that UConn game, you had Holman come out, and you think he could be the savior, and he drives him down the field. A nice first drive, 77 yards. They settle for the field goal, and then after the UConn touchdown, you have UCF taking a safety when the guy starts to,
and then
everything
kids trying
just
too hard.
falls apart after that.
Some of that's kids just trying too hard, and then that's what I mean by I don't know if there's going to be another win this season, because I think what happens is everyone wants to do something to make the big play to kind of get the team fired up, and when you start seeing those things happen, that's when kids start wondering, I'm focused on my career, I'm focused on what I need to do, and then that's when you start losing teams.
There was a football game played on Saturday that we are going to talk about that there was not really news coming from on Monday. I teased FSU beat writer Brendan Sonnone that he needed to find something to cover on Monday because everybody else was going crazy. But Florida State beats Miami, 29-24. 6th straight win in the series for the Seminoles. They dominated this game but could not put it away. Just yardage-wise in this game, 248-20 rushing advantage, FSU. Total yards, 539 to 425 advantage FSU. Dalvin Cook, who we're going to talk about, 222 yards and 2 touchdowns, a 72-yard touchdown run. Everett Golson, his best game at Florida State, showing his poise and decision-making. But yet, Miami had a chance all the way to the end, had a lead the first time Florida State trailed this season, had a lead in the fourth quarter. So you look at this game from a Florida State standpoint and you think, wow, we really dominated them. We should have won. We did win. But it was the way that we did it maybe leaves a little bit of concern. But then you realize, well, they drove down the field. The offense connected when it needed to, and the defense made a play when it needed to. And it was enough to get the win and improve to 6 straight wins over Miami.
Well, Florida State's just following the model that it seems every top team in the country is doing, which is survive and move on. I mean, that just happens to be the case. Did Florida State play its best football? No, not really. And you can see where there's still some concerns. I think they took, Miami took advantage of the big plays. That's something we talked about last week. They were able to get the ball down the field. Brad Kai was able to find some receivers to make big plays. I think defensively there's some question marks at some certain spots. Guys need to step up and play a little better. We did see Everett Golson play better. That was a concern I think we had, was he going to be able to do that? I think he opened up the offense just a little bit. And then, you look at Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was able to take advantage of big rushing plays, was able to have some big plays himself, and that helped kind of push things forward. Listen, Florida State continues to win, but the problem is kind of like what we saw a couple of years ago when you're just scraping by and you're undefeated and you want that respect factor, you're not going to get it, because I think we saw that in the rankings. I don't think anyone really thought Florida State, even though they beat an okay Miami team, they didn't rise in the polls. It wasn't like they really made a big leap. So I think, again, until we get to that Clemson game, that's the game that I look at where if they beat Clemson, then I think you'll see a little bit more buzz on this team and what's going on. But as of right now, it's just survive and move on.
Florida State, 4 trips to the red zone in that game. No touchdowns on those trips. They were up 20-10 at the half. Should have been up a lot more. So Monday, we have the George O'Leary news. We have the Will Grier news. And then Monday night, the other big news of the day, Steve Spurrier. The story comes out that he is going to quit immediately, which of course he did. Resign, retire, quit, whatever you want to call it. Steve Spurrier steps down as the coach of South Carolina, explained it more on yesterday when he talked about the reasoning behind it, and it was about recruiting. It was about just knowing it was time. Lots of ways to go about this with Steve Spurrier. I guess the first question is, what does this mean just as a present day now situation? We can talk about his legacy some too, but the decision for Steve Spurrier to decide right now in the middle of the season, the halfway mark, that he was done, it was time to move on. Where are you on this decision, and what does this mean when he does this?
Well, we talked a little bit about this earlier with George O'Leary and UCF. I think this decision was made for the good of the program and for the future. I think, again, there were a lot of question marks surrounding the program and Spurrier when it came to recruiting. We saw a little bit of that after last year. There was a little bit of a buzz that maybe he was thinking about retiring. He tried to squash that in the offseason. SEC Media Days, that was one of the first questions. How close were you to retiring? He tried to play it off and say, listen, I'm going to be coaching 2 or 3 more years. Then after that, after Hoover, a couple weeks later, he has to hold an impromptu press conference where he says, again, I'm angry. I'm not retiring. I want to, because what's happened is other programs around that, and they're recruiting some of the same kids, are telling these kids, oh man, I don't think Steve Spurrier is going to be around. I don't think he's going to be around for another year. I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. So that, I think, kind of built up. Plus the fact that there were some injuries. The team comes out with a really horrible start. They're 2-4. I mean, I think what happened is Spurrier looked at the program, looked at the way things were going, realized, he kind of mentioned he was kind of a liability when it came to recruiting, and decided, listen, if I'm not having any more fun and I feel like this program is really not going in the right direction, I'm going to walk away right now. I want to give an opportunity for Sean Elliott to step in and try to turn this program around, and let's see what happens after that.
And let's be honest, Steve Spurrier doesn't want his last game to be a loss to Clemson and walking off the field. I mean, there's some selfish reasons in him deciding to do it now also. But the legacy is Steve Spurrier, and obviously it means something in the state of Florida because of what he did. And while he struggled at Washington and while he improved South Carolina and had seasons there that they had never imagined, his real legacy of coaching happens at his alma mater, where he got the Heisman Trophy as a player, came back to coach, changed the SEC, changed the University of Florida football program, changed so much in his time there. And really, to me, that's what we're talking about when we look back on the legacy of Steve Spurrier, just how much he changed football in the South, in the state, in Gainesville.
Well, I want to look at this as the big picture, really. I mean, yes, Florida, that's fine. You saw what you did. You saw what you did South Carolina. But he really changed the offensive mindset. This was a part when football was all about defense. It was about running the ball. It was occasionally you passed. But he really was one of the first guys to introduce that fun and gun offense where they went out and they just threw the ball around and they put a lot of points up and a lot of yardage. Now today, you see teams like Baylor and TCU and Oregon and some of these other programs that are,
that's
running
all
up.
they do.
That's all they do. But, Steve Spurrier was the first one really to do that, especially in a conference like the SEC, which was known for being a defensive run-first type of conference. And he really opened that up. And that kind of opened the door for a lot of these coaches. Hugh Freeze, for instance, he wouldn't be doing what he's doing at Ole Miss if it weren't for Steve Spurrier and the offensive mindset you got there. You look at some of these other programs that are kind of up-tempo now and really pushing things. Texas A&M, I know they're a late addition to the SEC, but those are the things that we saw. So I think Spurrier really kind of opened the door there, took the quarterback position, and really kind of made it into what is a glamour spot, if you think about it.
He designed the system quarterback.
He designed the system quarterback. Really, he did. And he showed how important it was to develop that quarterback. And you talk about, yes, I think what he did at Florida, he put Florida on the map. He made Florida what they were, obviously winning, a national title in 1996. Same thing he did at South Carolina. He went there. Really, they had some of the best successful years under them. Put South Carolina on the map, made him a top 4 team at one point. So I think he's done an amazing job as a coach. I think his personality, his humor, all those things. I tweeted out yesterday or Monday, the SEC needs to add him as the opening act to the SEC Media Days because it was the reason you went, because you wanted to hear what he was going to say, because he was always good for a great line or a good quote or something to kind of keep keep the media members really kind of chuckling. So he's a guy that you're going to miss that. I think down the road, you'll see him. Obviously, I think he's going to be on game day this weekend. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't maybe go in an analyst role at some point, maybe. Just kind of provide a little bit of his kind of give and take. Whoever gets him, whether it's ESPN or Fox or SEC Network or whatever, I think they're going to do a great job of having him on their studio shows.
And I think that's why he's getting a pass for quitting on his team 6 weeks into his season, because media, we love him. And he gave everybody great quotes because while we can look at his reasoning and we can defend it, if any other coach decided 6 weeks into a season, I'm done, we wouldn't be carrying him out on the shoulders and that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Randy Edsall was pushed out the door. I mean, at Maryland, and I think
fired's different than just quitting.
Yeah, but I'm going to say this, and I think if you feel like you're not ready, if you feel like that you aren't helping the team, if you feel like you're more of a hindrance, and you decide I'm done, would George O'Leary?
I'm not saying it's the wrong thing that he did.
No, I know.
I'm just saying the reaction to him in this reactionary sports media world. Any other coach, if it was a coach that gave us terrible quotes and never talked to you and
if he hadn't had a winning he wasn't a winning record type guy.
But it was, I think the reaction. I'm not saying what he did was wrong, but I think the reaction may have been just a little bit different because we loved him. I mean, Steve Spurrier was a guy you loved talking to if you were a media guy because he gave you good quotes.
He was great for Twitter. I mean the one-liners and everything like that. And so I understand as a player you're upset because he decided to walk away. Especially halfway through the season, you see that happen. But again, I mean, you look at what he's been able to do for college football, and I think the idea that he just walked away, is it weird? Yes, and I think some people will continue to push that. But I also don't necessarily know if he decided he just wanted to quit. I just think maybe he got to the point where he looked around and decided, I'm becoming more of a hindrance than a help.
Another coach's season came to an abrupt end over the weekend, and it's one without Florida ties, but it has big national ties. And, of course, USC, the firing of Steve Sarkisian, and just almost a soap opera-like story here. It's a coach that's battling an illness by all accounts. We know what happened in August. We talked about what happened in August on the show when he appeared to be overserved, if you will, at an event. An alumni event and yelling curse words and such. There are talks now. Now, if you do like the investigation into the reporters for LA Times are finding receipts for Washington when he was up there of exorbitant amount of money spent on bar tabs and such. The final straw was Sunday. He was not at practice. Pat Hayden says, and he's the AD at USC. Could not get a hold of Sarkisian. Could not get a hold of him on Monday to tell him he was fired, but went ahead, let him go. We hope that Steve Sarkisian is getting the help that he needs. It's an awful battle, but so many questions to go on this. Does this even matter if they're not 4-2 and struggling? Because this USC team on paper is one of the best teams in college football, and they've had a bad season. Pat Hayden, his entire press conference was defending Pat Hayden and trying to point out all the things that he was almost giving his CV out there. But this is a story that there's so many different twists and turns. It almost should be a novella. But going forward, this is USC now that needs to replace a guy that they hired, that they put their faith in, that they did whatever background checks they claim that they did or did not do. But now they have to rebuild on the fly also and find a coach to come in there.
Yeah, but this is when I look at this whole story, I mean, USC as a football program has had problems the last 5 or 6 years. Obviously, Pete Carroll came in, he did what he did, he won some national titles. But let's be honest, Pete Carroll didn't leave that program, shining example of what all you should follow as football programs because they were under NCAA investigations, NCAA suspensions, and obviously having to vacate wins and things like that. I mean, so it's not like USC was clear cut, what was going on. I really took Pat Hayden to task. I still do believe that. I think that really they did a poor job in this whole situation because again, I think you as an athletic director, I don't care if someone is familiar with your program or came from your program or used to coach there or whatever, you have to vet every person you hire, whether it's an assistant coach, the head coach, the trainer, the water boy. You have to do your due diligence and vet these guys because you have to make sure that there's something that comes up. You're prepared for that. And, it looks like, looking at the LA Times reports that Steve Sarkisian had a problem and, reportedly with alcohol. And that's an addiction when you look at the big picture of things. And I think you should have been able to know that. The LA Times, all they did is make a couple phone calls and they got all these receipts. You tell me, Pat Hayden said they spent $1 million and hired a search firm, a coaching search firm, to look at this. They can't.
He was in the program at USC for 7 years.
So
He's not a
stranger. This didn't happen. We're talking about situations where reportedly he had booze in his office. Drank heavily on plane flights. This is what people were reporting. I mean, these are all things that, if that's the case, that's a serious issue. And if I'm a parent, and again, I'm sending you my child and saying I want you to take care of my child because you are a coach, and you hear all these stories. you got to start wondering what's going on here because, obviously you didn't put a good person in charge. So I think that's where Pat Hayden dropped the ball. Honestly, I think they need to do a better job. The next coach they hire, he shouldn't have anything to do with that decision. It should come down from a group, someone who sits down and makes sure that these guys are hired, and make sure you hire someone who definitely fits what you're looking for. It can't just be someone who's a former Trojan or has ties to the school or whatever. It has to be someone who's the best fit. Because right now, I don't care about wins and losses. This program is in shambles. I think this weekend it's going to show against Notre Dame. And I think, honestly, this is one of those cases where you want to get this next hire right because you've had to deal with Lane Kiffin, what happened there. You're dealing with Steve Sarkisian. If this happens a third time, it's your third strike. I think you're out.
I mean, my question to Pat Hayden is, where were you through all this? If these players are reported, if these stories are all true about him,
he saw
I saw it in August.
He was in August when you see that happening.
But this wasn't the first time, and if it's happening on plane flights, and if players know about it, that means somebody has seen this before.
Yes.
But then in August, you see it happening. Todd Marinovich just talked about how he was at the event. Todd Marinovich, of course, struggled with heroin addiction.
Yes.
Is a big proponent of recovery and helping people recover. He noticed it, said something to people, hey, he needs help. But you let him go and you let him coach.
Yes.
And you say, I talked to a doctor and a doctor said it was okay. Back then, if you're just finding out Sunday about these past things in Washington, well, then you mess up as an AD. In August, you should have been saying, what is this problem? You don't just show up at an event intoxicated and I say, there might be something more here than just a one slip up with bad cold medicine.
You know what? Then he's an enabler. That's what happens with people
if he's 6-0, we don't care about it.
Well, but that's what happens when someone who suffers through addiction and you kind of just turn your head and you don't pay attention because you just want, it's his problem or my, it's your problem. You're an enabler. And I mean, again, if you had just stepped forward and said, I know we've got a lot of money tied into you, and I know you're a football coach, but we need to get you help. As a human being, we need to get you help. And then we're going to just kind of move on this year with an assistant coach and move forward with that. I think that would have been better because then if this stuff happens, then you could say, listen, we did what we tried to do and he wasn't able to do it, and you move forward. By not doing anything, I think that makes you look worse, and I think it makes it look like you didn't care. And again, it really shows that I think the ball was dropped at different levels. And not just with Pat, especially if we find out that assistant coaches or players or anyone complained about this or went to someone higher up in the school and this was ignored. That's even worse.
All right, let's jump ahead now. Let's just start getting the picks out of the way. There's so much to talk about. We don't want to be here all day, so we're going to move on to the national picks. And there's so many big games this weekend. We have 4 that we're going to pick, and I had 4 that we wanted to talk about, and you kind of touched upon one of them, USC at Notre Dame. And we know what Notre Dame is going into this season. We don't know what USC is going into this game. So this will be interesting to see how USC bounces back. It's a rivalry game, but Notre Dame, I still say, is in control of its own destiny if it finishes up with their season 11-1 with the schedule they have on them. But now we have USC and all this issues heading to South Bend.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame obviously wanted USC, if anything, they wanted USC to have beaten Washington, to come into this game with a little bit of buzz, to have a little bit, because that helps their overall strength of schedule and that picture. But I think, going into here, I look at this USC program, I don't know how they're going to move forward. I mean, Clay Helton's a good coach. He's the interim coach now. He's the offensive coordinator. He's done it before, and obviously I think he's trying to get the players built up. But to go on the road, to deal with all this, to play football, to hit on the road, get to South Bend at Notre Dame Stadium and deal with this, I think Notre Dame wins this game just because of the idea that I think there's too much distraction going on with this USC program. And I think that Notre Dame will ignore all that and looks forward, like you mentioned, to the fact that, listen, we control our own destiny. We come out of here with only 1 loss, we're going to probably find ourselves in the New Year's Six Bowl.
Yeah, at least, if possibly even into the playoff. 3 of the top 4 ranked teams in the country have tests this weekend. We're not picking them. Arizona State is at number 4 Utah, number 2 Baylor hosts West Virginia, number 1 Ohio State, still number 1 hosts Penn State. Their schedule gets tougher now. I watch Ohio State football probably even more than most, but you just keep waiting for it to click, and it started to click against Maryland. They had trouble with the Maryland quarterback. They gave up some big plays, but 49 points. I don't know, Urban Meyer maybe has decided on Cardell Jones, you're a quarterback from goal line to 20, and then the red zone quarterback is JT. But it worked against Maryland. You look at this Penn State game, and I look at this as it's going to be a close game, or Ohio State is going to look like the team they did at the end of last year, and they're going to beat Penn State by 30, and there they are. They're finally there.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Urban, this isn't something new to him. I mean, I think anyone who's followed his career in Florida saw this with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. You know, whenever Florida got within the goal line, they would throw in those packages with Tim Tebow to kind of give those opportunities. I think what he wants to do is have Cardale Jones kind of direct the offense, as you mentioned, maybe from the 20 to the 20 or however he wants to do it, goal line to the opposing 20, and then he wants to throw in those goal line packages with JT Barrett. I think that's interesting. I've always felt like that with this team, it really kind of does fall on Ezekiel Elliott's shoulder. I think they need to continue to run him hard, let him kind of take some of that pressure off of Cardale Jones, who continues to try to do a little bit more than he really is needed. I think defensively this team is aggressive. They need to continue to do that as well. I think this weekend they shouldn't have a problem with a Penn State team. I think when they struggle is against quarterbacks who are a little bit more mobile, have a little bit more opportunity. We know Penn State's offensive line is dismal. I mean, we know Christian Hackenberg has no time to throw the ball. I think as long as Joey Bosa looked like he did against Maryland, I think they'll win this game pretty easily.
Now the games we are actually going to pick, and we're starting off with a Thursday night game, 10:30 p.m. on ESPN. Number 18 UCLA visits number 15 Stanford, the Bruins, against the Cardinal. The Cardinal have won 7 straight in this series, and UCLA has won 12 straight away from home. So one of those streaks is going to end in this one. Really, Stanford has really bounced back from their opening game loss at Northwestern, a game I picked Northwestern to win just because of the early start for Stanford. I know that may not be real scientific, but they were a slow starting team. They're playing well now. They've rushed for over 300 yards their last 2 wins. Kevin Hogan, he's settled in. He's having his most efficient season so far in his decorated career at Stanford. The Cardinal now are in the driver's seat in the Pac-12 North, which means they're in the driver's seat to win out and make it to the playoff possibly. This is one of their big tests with UCLA coming in. Who do you add in this one?
Well, I like Stanford. I think Stanford's playing, as you mentioned, some of the best football right now. I think they found they worked some of the kinks out that they maybe suffered against that Northwestern team. I mean, they're doing everything they have to do. I think UCLA, losing Miles Jack, losing some of their players on defense to injury, I think those are big impact players. I think Josh Rosen, again, is a tremendous talent. I think he will be a tremendous talent for several years coming, in this conference. But I think, again, we're seeing some of the issues, some of the inconsistencies you expect to see out of a young quarterback. I think Stanford can, as long as they continue to do what they can do, I think they're going to be right there. They lose this game, they're done. I don't think you're going to see them being mentioned at all. And they can still win the Pac-12 North, as bad as Oregon is. But again, I think Cal's playing well. I think they're a team that's going to give them troubles as well. So I like Stanford in this game. I like it to be a close game, though.
Paul Perkins is the main player at UCLA, the running back. In the game UCLA lost this year, he was held to under 60 yards rushing. If there's a team that can do that, it's Stanford. Yeah. I'm taking the Cardinal in this game also, and they'll stay in control of that Pac-12 North. On Saturday afternoon at noon, undefeated Iowa. There's like 5 or 6 bowl-eligible teams already. Iowa is one of those teams, 6-0. They head to Northwestern. Iowa has won 3 of the last 4 in this series. They won last year 48-7. They lead the Big Ten with 11 scrimmage plays of 40-plus yards. They have 8 interceptions. Iowa is quietly becoming a force in the Big Ten. People may not know this. They're ranked number 17, but they beat Northwestern. The path is clear for Iowa to be in that Big Ten title game, and then who knows what happens when they get there. But quietly they become this team. I think they'll get a chance to really solidify themselves against Northwestern, who comes in a little bit dinged after getting blown out by Michigan last weekend.
Yeah, this Iowa team really is kind of the lunch pail mentality type team, blue collar, which we expect out of an Iowa team. They came in, obviously they're not flashy. I dare you to name 3 players that play on the Iowa team, to be honest with you. I don't think you probably could do it.
I don't know that I could.
Yeah, so,
I've watched them play.
But again, they're playing solid football. I think Northwestern comes in this game in a very interesting situation. They got blown out by Michigan. They looked horrible, but Michigan's got one of the best defenses in the country. So now they've faced some of the best defense. So going against Iowa's defense isn't that strong when we look at it. I think Northwestern wins this game. I think they're going to be they're mad with what happened against Michigan. They had an opportunity to do something. They know that if they beat Iowa, they've got a chance to take over in the Big Ten West, which is really apparently just wide open with Iowa, Northwestern. Maybe Wisconsin can make a big push, or Minnesota. But I think Northwestern wins this game because, again, I think they're mad, and I think defensively they're still a strong defensive unit.
Last week we did 5 national games. I took the road team in all 5 games, and I lost all 5 games. I don't learn my lesson, though. I'm taking Iowa in this one. I think they go into Northwestern. I think Northwestern was exposed a little bit against Michigan. Michigan hit them hard early, and Northwestern wasn't able to bounce back. This will be the key to see how they can. They're at home. If they can recover quickly, then they have a shot. But I think Iowa comes in and just Big Tens them to death with the old school Big Ten that Iowa plays. Number 10 Alabama visits number 9 Texas A&M. The SEC game of the week on CBS at 3:30. Texas A&M comes into the game looking for their first 6-0 start since 1994. They haven't been 3-0 in conference play that they've been in. This will be Big 12 back in 2000 for a strong start to Texas A&M, an Alabama team that so far this year, you could almost argue that they've been playing down to their competition. They struggled against Arkansas. They got the win. I still have Alabama as my pick to come back and win the SEC West. But this and LSU are the 2 tests remaining in Alabama for Alabama in this season leading up to the SEC title game, and they're visiting Texas A&M. You believed in the Aggies long before I did. Are they real enough to knock off Alabama at home?
Well, I think when you look at this defense, I think you look at, with John Chavis coming over from LSU to take over the defense, I think the Aggies have done a better job defensively. Myles Garrett leads the SEC. It's sacks, 7.5 sacks, I think. So, he's a guy that really got to watch out for. I think as much as I like Texas A&M and like Texas A&M, I think Alabama wins this game. I think you're right. I think Alabama is playing down to the level of their opponents. I think what they need is, as long as Jake Coker doesn't make any mistakes, he kind of becomes more of a game manager. As long as he hands the ball off to Derrick Henry, doesn't make any mistakes, he's going to let his defense do the job, because I think that defense has done an amazing job. The front line has held up, and they've caused a lot of chaos. They were, again, they struggled a little bit against Arkansas, but were able to pull it out late in that game. I like Alabama to win this game, but I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to come down to the fourth quarter, and it's going to really kind of have to be one of those last-minute hold-on type things.
We breezed through some stuff that we had planned because there's so much to talk about, but my player to watch this week was going to be Kyle Allen, because good quarterback play can do damage to Alabama. We saw what Ole Miss did with that. So he is the key focus. I don't think he will do enough for them to win, but I do believe that if A&M has a chance in this game, it's because of the play of Kyle Allen. I'm taking Alabama in this game, but it's going to be a very close game, and it's going to be an exciting game, and it's going to come down to the end. And if Alabama just remembers, hand the ball to Derrick Henry. I could be the offensive coordinator for Alabama. Hand the ball to Derrick Henry. Yeah. Don't forget he's your running back.
And I'll point this out. If A&M beats Alabama, Alabama hasn't lost 2 SEC games, in a season, and it's been since, I would say, 2008, 2009. So, it's been a while since
they still have LSU on their schedule.
They still have LSU on their schedule.
We'll talk about LSU in a moment. The other national game we're going to talk about, number 7, Michigan State, goes across the state to play number 12, Michigan, in the 3:30 game on ESPN. The Spartans looking for their 7th win in 8 tries against the Wolverines. Michigan State, they come in this game with a 10-game win streak, but this is a Michigan State team besieged by injuries that they have not been playing well. They struggled against Rutgers. They won the game. Rutgers, of course, had the infamous play to end the game on 4th down. All you got to do is
the ball? Yes.
heave it to the end zone, and the quarterback spikes the ball to stop the clock. Rutgers loses by 3 points to Michigan State. Michigan comes into this game. They've found their identity under Jim Harbaugh. They have not allowed a point in 3 games. It's 3 straight shutouts. First time, I think, since the mid-'80s for Michigan.
Yes.
The offense has found a balance between running and passing. I think they're both like around 200 yards per game with each. This, though, is where you find out if this Michigan team is for real. Their loss to Utah looks better now, just like the win looks better for Utah beating Michigan. But now they're going to play Michigan State, who is still, in this case, for the last couple years, the big brother in the state because they've had this success. They have Connor Cook at quarterback. They're the ones that were ranked number 2 in the country just a couple weeks ago. This is where we find out how real Michigan is.
Yeah, and I think really, when you talk about teams you don't want to face if you're opposing coach, I think Michigan right now is, because they are playing the best football heads and tails above in most of the, look up the top teams right now. Because, again, they're doing it with that defense. They have the number 2 defense in the country. They're able to shut down players. Their front line has been outstanding. They've shut down running attacks, which I think is key in this matchup because, again, we know Michigan State wants to kind of mix it up a little bit. Run the ball, use Connor Cook, some of those, talented wide receivers and get the ball downfield. I think Michigan loves to stop that running game, loves to get pressure on the quarterback. I think you look offensively. Jake Riddick has not done anything to be outstanding, but he's done a great job of being a game manager. Kind of reminds you a little bit of his head coach, Jim Harbaugh. Really isn't going to go out there and throw for 400 or 500 yards, but he's going to do whatever it takes to get the ball down the field. They've got a nice little running game going on there as well with Davion Smith. So I like Michigan in this game. Because it's at Ann Arbor, I think they're the hot team right now. I think this gives Jim Harbaugh an opportunity to kind of showcase what he's been able to do. Listen, if it continues to go this way, there's a possibility they go up against Ohio State in that final game, and it could mean a spot in the college football playoff.
It can mean a whole lot. I'm not going there yet, though. As much as I enjoy the Harbaugh story, and you're right, Michigan is as playing well as any team in the country that's not located in Gainesville. This, just as I think Ohio State is going to come into this game this week against Penn State and rise up, this is the game where I think Michigan State clicks. And right or wrong, both of those two teams have been drudging through some games that are winnable. Rutgers, that's not going to get you hyped up, especially when you have Michigan coming up. Michigan State comes into this game. They get back to the Michigan State that we thought they were going to be coming into the year, and they stop the Harbaugh Express, at least for a while. At least a couple weeks, then we can talk about how great Michigan is again afterwards. But Michigan State wins this one at Michigan. 4 games involving the state. We have to pick this one. UCF visiting Temple. The Knights 0-6. The Owls 5-0. 7:30 game on Saturday on CBS Sports Network. Jihad Thomas is the star for Temple. He's averaging 182 all-purpose yards a game. That's the best in the American Conference. Tyler Matakevich obviously leads the defense. It's a very good Temple defense. This is a Temple defense that shut down Penn State, which we learned is not that hard, but it's still, that's where one of their wins have come from. I'm not taking UCF. Are you taking UCF?
No. I mean, we talked about it. I think their defensive pressure up front, we know UCF's offensive line is young and inexperienced and riddled, and I think they'll take advantage of that, and I think they'll get to Justin Holman because of the fact that really UCF has no running game. I mean, they're a one-dimensional team. I know C.J. Jones has done okay. I know Taj McGowan may be coming back this week. I just see Temple winning this game.
Virginia Tech, that's how much time we're spending on UCF. We're done. Okay. Virginia Tech heads to Miami on Saturday afternoon, a 3:30 start on ESPNU. These are two of the top teams as turnovers heading into this game. Miami +9, did not make Florida State turn the ball over. Virginia Tech +6. Michael Brewer, still a day-to-day decision for Virginia Tech. They've played well on defense in their 2 ACC games. They're 1-1, giving up 15 points per game. They've produced 4 sacks in each game. But the question in this one, can Miami bounce back? And a great friend of mine growing up, who's a Miami fan, and we talked during the game, and we've talked after, and just him as a fan, he's saying, they had it. It was so close. Miami players have to realize it was so close to beating Florida State. You could see it on the sidelines. Yeah, they were beat around on the field, but they had a chance at the end. Could not get the win. Miami players got to be feeling it. Can they bounce back a week later at home and get up for Virginia Tech?
I'd like to know is how many moral victories does Al Golden have on his resume? Because I don't necessarily know if that's really going to count when it comes time to decide whether to keep him or not. But that
moral victories don't pay for airplane banners.
That's true. The things go away. But that being said, I do feel like Miami is playing really well. I mean, as much as they didn't, the thing that they need to learn to do is they need to learn to finish games. They were right there with Florida State. They need to learn how to do what it takes to win those games. They haven't found that yet. These players haven't been able to say, what do we need to do to take advantage of these situations and to win these games? I think Virginia Tech is starting to find a little bit of an identity now as itself. So going into this game, it's going to be really tough. We know in the past, every time Miami comes off of one of these losses with Florida State, they kind of start to tumble afterwards. I like Miami in this game. I'm going to go with them to win this game. I think Brad Kai is playing well. I think he can continue to find a way to take that third down situation and to be able to get, convert and to find ways to put points on the board. I think they can do that. As long as they're semi-healthy, I think Miami wins this game.
Yeah, 8 of 16 on third down against Florida State. It was the most shocking number of the season for Bad Kyler.
I think that's why I think I've got them kind of moving forward and winning.
I'm taking Miami in this game, and for Miami's sake, hopefully the Florida State game was early enough in the season that it doesn't fall apart like it did last year. They just never recovered from that loss. They have time to recover this time.
Yeah, and I'll put this out. The ACC Coastal, once again.
It's winnable.
It's winnable. I mean, you look at, there's 5 teams right now that you look at and think, well, they could be there. I know Pittsburgh's there. I know you look at that team, and I know you look at, what Duke is doing and everything, but it's still winnable. They just got to kind of take care of business.
Yeah, now as Al Golden said, they still have a chance to win the Coastal. They still control their own destiny in it if they get done. I'm picking Miami in this game against Virginia Tech. Florida State, the victor of that Florida State-Miami game, they're at home Saturday, a noon start against the Louisville Cardinals. Cardinals haven't won in Tallahassee since 1952. They've lost 8 times in Tallahassee since then. They're better now than they were to start the season. They found a freshman quarterback, Lamar Jackson, mostly running the ball, but he's totaled 620 yards of offense in the last 2 games. He could present a bit of a problem for Florida State. Florida State comes in this game, though, with one of the best run defenses in the country. You have to think they're going to be able to slow down whatever Louisville brings their way. The question for Florida State, almost the antithesis of Miami, is making sure they get up for this game because they're coming off the big Miami win. It's going to be a noon start. It's going to be a whole different atmosphere in the Doak than it was for the Miami game. But if they're able to get past that and play the football game that they're capable of playing, I don't see how they lose to Louisville at home.
Well, again, I think I'm going to look at this way. I think a lot of this falls on Dalvin Cook. I think if Dalvin Cook is healthy, he has a little bit of issue with that hamstring. If he's healthy, what he's been able to do is take advantage of big plays. Well, I think 7 out of his 8, touchdowns this year have been, over the 20-yard mark. So that he knows how to, make the big home run, run that he's been able to do. I think if they can continue to do that, and they can continue to get Everett Golson to play, good football, and he's been able to do that so far. Don't turn the ball over. I think the defense will be there. This, to me, is a game where I look at this game as kind of a precursor to that Clemson game, because if they could stop Lamar Jackson, who's very similar in some regards to like Deshaun Watson, I think if they're able to stop him and contain that offense, I think that's a good sign moving forward for that Clemson game. I think they're going to give up some points. I think this defense just isn't as good as we've seen the last couple of years. But I like Florida State to win this game and coming out in the very end.
And talking about Dalvin Cook, I'm picking Florida State too, but remarkable play in that Miami game to pull up when he felt a twinge in his hamstring. He was pulling away from the Miami defense, running for a touchdown, knew his body enough. I mean, at 19, 20, I didn't know my body well enough to do this, but he knew enough to pull up, stop immediately, take the tackle, take the loss, get to the sideline, knew it could be massaged out to prevent further injury. That is incredible on an athlete that level, to know enough to stop mid-sprint to prevent further injury that would have knocked him out of the whole game.
But I will say this too, and this is as much as I picked Florida State, I will say this too. If I'm, if I'm Tom Grantham, the head coach or the defensive coordinator, at Louisville, what I do is I start stacking the box. I think it's what a lot of defenses are going to start doing. They're going to make, Dalvin Cook earn those yards the hard way. Cook's not, I think he's one of the leaders in the country of getting hit at the line of scrimmage and, losing yards, in a sense. But his yards are always big plays. So I think if I'm Louisville's defense, I stack the box. I make Everett Golson beat me through the air. Because, again, yes, he's played well, and yes, he's made some plays. That's the way I think you got to beat Florida State.
Everett Golson looked as good as he has at Florida State against Miami. They open up the playbook. If they continue to do that, will be interesting to see. Final game we're picking, number 8 Florida travels to Death Valley to play number 6 LSU. It's a night game. Starts at 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. That place will be rocking, and it's all about Leonard Fournette. He leads the nation in rushing for LSU. 1,022 yards, 204 yards a game, 12 touchdowns. The fastest an SEC back has ever gotten to 1,000 yards in a season. That's Leonard Fournette in this one. And then they have Brandon Harris, who's going to be your guy to watch this week. He's 5-1 as LSU starter. He has not thrown an interception. That's key for this one. He runs the ball well. He's thrown for 610 yards, 4 touchdowns. But this game, it comes down probably to Leonard Fournette and what this guy is able to do, because he is the heart and soul of this LSU team.
Yeah, he really is. And I think, this was the game that I circled that I felt like, LSU was looking for its first really big challenge, and this was going to be it. I think they haven't faced a defense like Florida. We know what they can do. They're able to shut some teams down. Like I mentioned with, Dalvin Cook, that's how you beat LSU, is you stack the box. You make Leonard Fournette have to struggle. We saw a little bit of that against in South Carolina game. They kind of made those yards tough yards, 4 or 5 yard runs. You make him not kind of have that big 70, 80 yard touchdown run. You immediately make him work for it as well. Brandon Harris is the guy, I think, if you're looking for a player to watch outside of Fournette, I think he's the guy, the LSU quarterback, because again, I think he was able to do a little bit more last week against South Carolina, which is just an average defense. I think Florida's going to make him throw the ball. They're going to make him try to see if he can get some guys out there as well. I've gone back and forth on this pick. And as much as I feel like, again, LSU at Tiger Stadium on a night game, you kind of wonder yourself, they very rarely lose these kind of games. I'm actually going to take Florida in this game because I feel like, even despite Will Grier, what's going on with Will Grier, I feel like I'm not that confident in LSU's passing attack. I'm not that confident that they can stop Leonard Fournette. No, I will not. I will not drink the Gatorade. But I do believe that Florida wins this game.
Sounds to me like you're drinking the Gatorade.
I'm not drinking the Gatorade. First of all, I'm afraid if I take this Gatorade, I may not pass a test later.
Yeah.
There we go.
I started with a little Gatorade.
Now you're gone to the big Gatorade.
And now I'm really drinking the Gatorade. And when Will Grier went out with the suspension, I found myself in a role of talking Gator fans off the ledge because Will Grier wasn't going to beat LSU. When I fell in love with this Florida team and started drinking the Gatorade, it wasn't because of Will Grier. It's because of this defense. This defense, it might be the best defense in the country. It is loaded, it is great secondary. The line is playing well. Antonio Morrison is playing just lights out on the defense. I think, and I circled this game a long time ago, they were going to be the team that's going to give LSU the biggest trouble because they can actually stop Fournette, force Brandon Harris to make passes. I don't know that he can do it. They can just find a little bit of offense from Trayon
and
Harris
that's the thing.
and Calvin Taylor.
This game could easily be, we joked about it last week, this game could easily be a 17-10 or a low-scoring affair because I don't think both these offenses, depending on what happens. Now, if Leonard Fournette comes out and rushes for 200 yards against Florida's defense, I don't think anyone can catch him to win the Heisman. I think unless he just doesn't do anything after that, I think that he can make the biggest statement as well. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Florida's front line is so good, and I just think, again, it's going to come down to who can score the last.
Yep, and I think the Florida offense is better than it was in the past. Jim McElwain, he's not colored by numbers. It's an actual offense. Trayon Harris comes in. The Gators get the job done. I'm running out of props. I feel like Carrot Top.
You are Carrot Top.
I'm running out of props.
Next week he's going to come back and he's going to have a little ventriloquist dummy, and it's going to be the Brant and Brant show.
If Florida beats LSU, I don't know what I'm going to do for the Georgia game. I'll have 2 weeks to plan for it, but
I'll throw this out there. I think too, when everyone talks doom and gloom with the situation with Will Grier, I think a good team rallies around that. I think a good team says, listen, you know what, we're going to use that. No one thinks we're going to win this game. We're going to use that and use that forward. Like I mentioned, having this happen on a Monday, I think Harris will have the first team reps. I think the players will rally around him. I think everyone will play a little bit extra harder. And I think they really have nothing to lose. You come in with this attitude that no one thinks we're going to win this game, but we are. I think that's why Florida wins. But I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a low-scoring, close affair.
And they're basically locking up the SEC East with this win over LSU. Yeah. They'll still have 3 games to play, but
they got to play. Georgia is going to be the big one. And let's not forget too that if Florida gets this win, they get a week off. They get a bye week before the Georgia game, so that should really get them ready to go going into that.
So Florida Gators. He's now drinking the Gatorade. He has joined here. Play with alligator there. Next week, we'll see if we were right, and we'll catch up on everything. Maybe not as busy a news week. We'll at least hopefully be able to look back at the games. For Matt Murschel, I'm Brant Parsons. Check us out every Wednesday at 2 p.m. for College Football Now right here at OrlandoSentinel.com.